Hello, everyone. So we're into this is our 30th podcast. So 13th podcast. So we have with us today our home team. Do we have Quang or not yet quite? No, we've got Storm in Vietnam. So the power goes on and off, on and off. So forgive us that. But we do have Luu Thi, who is with us today, and she's our guest of honor today. And she will be talking to us about the concept of evidence. So, before I, however, let Vi teach us a little bit about her recent reflections, and this is why we have Vi here. These extremely in, inquisitive. She reads stuff, she will exchange stuff with me, but she is very independent and loves her own inquiry and follows it. So, as a chair of these sessions, I would like to focus them a little bit and give you a good reason, actually, why we have this session. For some reason, Professor Lyon is upside down. He's been like this for 10 minutes. Like obviously he's on the other side of the globe, so we're all okay, and Andrew's upside down. So we're talking about the concern with evidence, and specifically Lou will be talking about listening comprehension because this is her focus. Now, right. So very often when I read stuff as a researcher, as a mentor, I see this concept of evidence, and I see people in education jumping up and down about the concept. They get very upset about it, but we can't remove it from the dictionary. We can't even remove it from research as a vocabulary that matters. So we would like to a little bit, maybe for the first 2 minutes, think of the concept of evidence, and maybe later on Lou will expand on it. So I talked about it, before, that there's been a criticism of research in education. Basically, people say that this is unreliable. It is unreliable. So that's this crowd from America, but we also had some other quotes. Storm, that you love it. Anyway, we had other quotes from educators like Professor Gary Thomas, who was pointing out that in education it's not just necessarily lack of reliability, but also lack of innovation. Everybody reproduces everybody who was in the past, so it's sort of going backwards. So however, this is a person that I would like you to maybe hear about because well, we can't actually escape the world. And Professor John Ioannidis is from I don't know, from the States, but it's a Greek name. And he's very famous. He's very famous, and he spoke about exactly that, evidence and reliability of research. Everybody quotes him. He's just like the Jesus of medicine, of medical research, right? So look what he said here, that most current published research findings are false. That's 2005, but they keep repeating the same person over and over again in terms of his concerns, and studies in medicines continue addressing his concern. So current published research findings in medicine are false. I mean, aren't you taking tablets? Aren't you looking into some sort of recent research to sort of get better? And here we go. Gods of medical research are saying, well, it's not what it seems. And look at this. He identified a few factors that he said matter and cause research to be false. And sometimes he says I identified them in blue and red. And my question to Lou is now, she's put on the spot. She didn't know I was going to do that to her. I would like her to think a little bit where her concerns lie, with which factor in terms of research design she thinks her talk today will tie up, right? Will relate to what aspect of these factors, right? Which aspect of those? So these are the different aspects of evidence, right? Research looks for evidence. So evidence is a multidimensional beast. Has a front, back, sides, all of those things, top, bottom. Um, right. So here are the dimensions of research. Effect sizes are when effect sizes are smaller, sometimes we have a problem with truth. Then when there's greater number and lesser pre-selection of tested relationships. Now some of us may not understand it instantly, but Lou is on the spot, so she's understanding everything faster than any of us. Where there is greater flexibility in designs, right? Well, maybe we just do like this. Why? Well, we don't know, we just stick this there, right? So flexibility in designs, flexibility in definitions, outcomes. It doesn't really matter what we find, right? It's not tightly controlled. Analytical modes, when there is greater financial and other interest, so we know that money matters. When more teams are involved in scientific field in chase of statistical significance, so research is likely to be less true if there is more teams involved in a scientific field in chase of statistical significance, right? So everybody wants to manipulate data so that they can make a claim. So he says simulations, which means probably repetition of what happened, what was claimed before, show that for most study designs and settings, it is more likely for a research claim to be false than true. Now, I put it there for you because we like patting ourselves on our back and say, well, I've discovered this. Now, cool. Now, everybody should know. And not only that, then policymakers are saying, well, we did meta-analysis of 5,000 studies and look what we've discovered, right? Like in Australia, we've got this guy and he's discovered that teacher matters. I mean, like, so that's the weather. And so today, right? So that's, parents and whatever. So what I'm saying is teachers matter. Obviously teachers matters. I don't think that we needed a $5 million study to find it out. But anyway, policymakers make their recommendation on the basis of some meta studies, and meta studies consider that maybe all the research that they actually interrogated is true. But what this guy is saying is more likely to be fake. Yeah, it's terrible, terrible news to us. Being humble really matters, and not only being humble, but being really, really rigorous. So Lou, you keep it in your mind, and now tell us, Lou, where do you think your concerns lie with evidence, neuroscience, and listening comprehension in regard to this slide?
Uh, First, I would like to say thank you for having me today to join with your discussion, and thank you for overestimate myself. I think I agree with this statement. I guess findings are not always true. That's why I think for me as a researcher, I use these neuroscience-based knowledge, and I want to play with them first to experiment them in my research.
But
Of
in
course,
order to
at the
make your findings, what?
yes,
Um, Less biased, more informed? Um, are you looking at, and as a result, a design which is based on more facts rather than assumptions, which is what they are talking about, the design, flexibility of designs and definitions. I mean, you always find studies that talk about listening comprehension but don't define listening, or they don't
Mm.
define comprehension, or they say comprehension is a cognitive skill. Yeah, I get
Yeah,
it.
just
But
yeah.
what is it, right? So I think that what I was looking into is for you to share with the audience what is it that you want to control, and that's why you're looking into neuroscience. What would you like to control better? And that's why you're looking into neuroscience, because we all look into different authors and different texts, different references for good reason. One of them is, oh, we're doing what is safe because my professor did that, so I do the same. But you're not doing what your professor did. You're looking elsewhere. You're looking everywhere. You look, and now you want to share with us your neuroscience research. Why?
I think at the earlier stage, I was inspired by Professor Andrew Lyon, and then I also in the quest of looking for the definition of listening comprehension by myself. So that's why I want to look for more neuroscience-based evidence so that I can understand the learning mechanism and also the
Yeah. So you're
listening
looking.
processes. Yes.
That's right. So you want what he is talking about. You want your design to be tighter.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in order to do that, you need your understandings of the concepts you're playing with to be
Yes.
actually better informed, rather than what often happens. Well, listening is listening, learning is learning, right? Reading is reading, text is just text. Like silly questions. Vocabulary is vocabulary. Right. So I think, yeah. So we're looking into neuroscience to see what's involved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I will just give you now your space and hope you will introduce us to your um, experiences and to your readings and to your thoughts, and engage us. I hope you will engage us in a discussion, and that would be just great. So thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. I think that's also a way for me to escape my echo chamber when I'm reading so many stuff. Uh, of course, I'm waiting for your, suggestion and also your thoughts on what I'm going to share. So I think let me start with the reason why I want to draw your attention to the emergence of educational neuroscience, and I think this is the interdisciplinary view nowadays. If we look at the literature review nowadays, we may see that the term educational neuroscience and also another phrase like mind, brain, and education. And these few aims to bring forward the understanding of underlying learning mechanism. A lot of research have been done, and I would like to share prominent projects conducted by a group of researchers led by Dubinsky. They organize a range of workshop for teachers, and in this workshop, they uh, provide provided the teacher with some neuroscience content knowledge, such as memory and learning, emotional processing, motivation, and reward circuit, and the like. And after the workshop, the teachers were interviewed, and their teaching practices were also observed. And this kind of project lasted around, as far as I remember, like 10 years. So it's a series workshop, and the teacher reported that this neuroscience-based knowledge can help them uh, to have a mental framework for uh, for their pedagogical choices. And another study also showed that foundational neuroscience concept can offer them, a lens to reconsider, revision, and redesign their lessons. So I think we can see that the benefits of neuroscience-based knowledge now today, and that's why
Can I interrupt you? Can I
yes,
interrupt you?
yes,
Um, so it's contested, and we need to be a little bit critical when we see statements like this. Obviously, and that's the way I suggest people read literature. So
mhm,
Dubinsky et al. Said so. Now we have people in Australia who are saying that neuroscience research doesn't translate into pedagogy.
you're right.
What am I right about?
Neuroscience doesn't translate the pedagogic approaches.
So why
What they
why
mean,
why bother?
is that it's just something can have the teacher, um, you know, re rethink the way they teach, and also opt another mindset in their teaching. Have them to understand more about their students. And I read somewhere like previously on the theoretical theories in language and learning, they are quite most of them are assumptions without any evidence, and that's why recently with the finding is neuroscience, it's just like conform these approaches, and some may be appropriate, but some is quite inappropriate when we look at the learning mechanism. So that's what I think. Uh, what do you think?
I think we can
Well,
discuss it later. I
well,
think it just
well,
continue.
let me make a. Can you hear me?
Yes, but a bit soft,
Can you hear
unclear.
me? Yes or no? Hello.
Yeah, Andrew,
Yes,
continue.
I have a different setup from normal today, so I don't know if you can hear me. I wanted
Just
to say what I wanted to say was that first one is that the guy who wrote the article that you're talking about replaced neuroscience with psychology. That psychology is okay, neuroscience is not okay.
hmm
Because neuroscience does not translate into pedagogy. And the question is, what does translate into pedagogy mean? Um, of course, it does. Nothing translate directly into pedagogy anyway. So we have to take it and do something with it in order to
oh,
make it pedagogic. So I think that particular point of view is is not special. Just that the guy who wrote this decided to make it special.
okay. So he's a
Um,
head of education and psychology at University of Queensland.
yes, and that's the problem. He's the head of the department of whatever it is in the head of what?
Education and psychology.
He's the head of education and psychology. So of course, neuroscience is no good. Psychology is great. So that's part of the problem. It's all in the discourse, and I want to introduce at the moment, just for the future of this conversation and other conversations, a phrase that I came up with. The phrase that I came up with as I was teaching this week. The phrase is the dogma defeats the data.
Oh yeah.
The dogma is always more powerful than the data. It doesn't matter how much data you bring in to a science or a discipline that claims to be evidence based. The dogma is still more powerful. And I find this amazing coming from a scientific, so called scientific community. So going back to what V was talking about in terms of neuroscience, I mean, the neuroscience is not a technique,
Yes.
but the neuroscience enables us to develop techniques. And that I think is the power, and that's I think is the interesting part where we take biological phenomena and use them to transform our students and then produce some data which may not be considered relevant depending on who's doing the judging.
Mhm.
Okay, I just thought I'd throw that in as a kind of comment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more because when I read these articles, I also wonder like they focus on classroom practices. They use the neuroscience knowledge to you have to equip the teachers with this knowledge, but they haven't mentioned about how to translate the findings into research. I think for a researcher, they should get access to these neuroscience-based knowledge first, and then experiment them, and also based on the principle, we can create some techniques, just like Professor Andrew Lyon said.
So what you're saying is there has to be a broker, right? So it's
Yeah,
not like
yeah.
neuroscience teacher,
Mhm.
although might be, but more likely there has to be a situation where there is a broker, and that means what you said technique or what you said research, right? So there's neuroscience, then there's a pedagogic research that looks into neuroscience and looks into the pedagogy, and then thinks what the heck can we do with all what that I know, how can we integrate
Mm.
not just neuroscience but integrate neuroscience and other knowledge we have and develop techniques that can support teachers better or students better. Yeah, so there is
Yes.
a broker, there's a space for a broker. And I think that was a bit, that, as Andrew said, that professor from University of Queensland missed that point, and he missed it. Why did he miss that point? Do you know?
You.
Well, I think it was without knowing the guy. I think that people always, when they produce discourse, do so from a specific point of view, and in his perspective, I think that there was a, a perspective of promoting the field that he works in. I mean, I don't think it's particularly unusual, but you may have a better answer.
Well, I don't know. Does anyone have an answer? I've got an answer, but I've got my answer. Anyone else has an answer? Why is it that he was looking with his bias and he didn't actually think neuroscience, then research integration of different fields, and then we look how that might apply or not in the context of teaching and learning? So, Lala or Lou, what do you think? Why did he miss that point?
Well, I think there are lots of people who will say that neuroscience is not compatible with pedagogy or with the TESOL world because what Andrew says, I think it was right. Dogma is stronger than the data. Well, in 2002, when I was in semester two, for example, I read a book by Professor Ray Jackendorf, Language, The Foundations of Language, brain, what is it, and grammar evolution, where he mentioned that,
Oh,
uh,
Jackendorf.
yeah, yeah,
Jackendorf.
yeah, that book was very influential because it was very influential in my memory. He said that language has four tiers of sound. Right, number one is prosody, number two is the syllabic structure, and then the third one is let me check my note. Yeah, the first tier is melody, second tier is syllabic structure, the third and fourth tier is segmental structures and phonemes and their distinctive features. But then in the following semester, I learned from another phonology book mentioning that we had to focus more on segmental units first rather than the intonation. So the chapters on intonation actually pop out in the very last chapters, penultimate chapters of the book, and I found similar patterns. And then I completed my undergrad degree and I took my master's degree, and nobody actually talked about Ray Jackendorf on the importance of melody and sound, for instance. And my experience also showed that the focus of listening comprehension is still pretty much the same from time to time. We still pretty much focus on segmental units rather than intonation. So when my students learn about verbotonal approach, it's actually an eye-opening experience for them. And what Andrew and you have done in my research was actually transformative, because now I can say to the world that in the context of transformative curricula and pedagogy in the 21st century, we have to teach language skills that change the mindsets of the learners. And I think that is one of the most important lessons for my PhD. And I think now the question I am trying to raise to my students is, what is actually the job of English teachers nowadays? And I think the best answer would be to understand educational policies and latest research evidence, as well as what implications we can derive for the benefits of our students. If we have a better understanding on the learning mechanism, the educational policies, because UNESCO also mentioned the importance of knowing and feeling. So we don't have to separate them anymore, right? UNESCO said that. But in the current curricula, we still focus too much on the cognitive side of things, but we neglect the emotional side of things. And at early stage of my PhD, for example, I remember that I collected six neuroscientific findings that can inform myself a better understanding of listening and the importance of prosody, for instance, in relation to listening comprehension. And I think the first one is about hemispheric lateralization, where research suggests the perception and processing of prosody are primarily mediated by the right hemisphere of the brain, and the role of Broca's area in processing information is also critical, even though it's located in the left hemisphere of the brain. And emotional processing of prosody, and I think it's also interesting because prosody carries emotional information in speech, and research has revealed the involvement of emotion-related brain regions in the processing of prosody. And then timing and rhythm, where perception of prosody involves the processing of timing and rhythm in speech. And I think another one is cross-modal integration, where the brain integrates prosodic cues with other linguistic and non-linguistic information to derive meaning. And individual differences, I think that's the sixth concept I learned in my early stage of PhD. Um, Neuroscientific studies have also explored individual differences in processing prosody. For example, differences in brain activation patterns have been observed between individuals with high and low prosodic abilities. These findings highlight the potential of neuroscience to investigate the neural basis of individual variations in listening, prosody comprehension. But actually, back in 1977, I guess, Andrew is more familiar with the work of Jack Smithler. The paper was infant recognition of mother's voice, and he clearly mentioned,
Slower, 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 slower.
yeah,
What was it? Just slower. Say it slower.
um,
I can't
well,
catch the reference. The
well,
reference.
the reference was entitled "Infant Recognition of Mother's Voice" by Jack Smithler in 1977, where he mentioned that prenatal babies hear and recognize the prosodic contours of their mother's speech in the womb, much like we would be able to hear the muffled ups and downs of conversations from people in the next room. So I think there is a clear scholarship that we never heard of. So we actually, literally speaking, miss the evidence from other fields, especially
Okay, so I would
neuroscience.
just.
Right.
So that's right. So let me just bring it back to where we started, and
Sure.
maybe Lou will take over now. So what you're saying, Lala, is there's a lot of information there, right? What Andrew is saying, but there's only one dogma. It doesn't matter. Right? So there's a lot of data. You are saying, Andrew is saying, well, who cares? And the professor from University of Queensland is saying, well, clearly no impact. Nobody knows what to do with it. Therefore, we're going back to the dogma. It doesn't matter. And Lou is saying, why is it that people don't work with the data rather than with the dogma? Why is everybody going back to the dogma and not working with so many findings that even just within the last 10 seconds, or I don't know, 2 minutes, was more than we could handle, which is what Lala has outlined, right? So he has given a lot of examples. There's a lot of things, and yet dogma prevails. So why?
Okay, well, there is a moment of silence. Can you hear me now? Because I've changed the microphones.
Yeah, much better.
Yes, much better.
Okay, all right. So I wanted to say something about intonation and segmentals. Lala is right. When you look at, and particularly when you look at teaching, the teaching of pronunciation and the teaching of intonation, you get a book like Ship or Sheep, for example, and in the book Ship or Sheep, you start off with the segmentals, and then you move to the intonation in the last chapter of the book. So you deal with the individual sounds first, and then you deal with the intonation last. And what's kind of interesting about that is that in reality, every vowel and every voice, and I wanted to say this because this is public, uh, every vowel and every voiced consonant in the language, when you produce it, has a component of intonation built into it, because the intonation is generated by the vocal cords primarily or entirely. And so the intonation then is an integral part of the segment. The trouble is that we live in an analog world which has variations in pitch and variations in sound and transitions. We're always in transitions when we talk about individual sounds. Individual sounds actually don't exist on their own. They're always in a dynamic context. And so the dynamic context is actually the intonative structure. And because the intonative structure is built into the segment, right? The idea of the segment is a categorization by linguists or by whoever. It's not natural. There is no natural thing which is, oh, we have individual sounds. We could have had a different way of organizing all of this in such a way that we we had units which take account of the intonative component plus everything else, or we don't, because that's not the way things worked out. And that's not the way in which categories worked out. But the trouble is we can't understand things. We can't make meaning without categories. So categories are the things that were invented to help us understand things. But in reality, the categories are not watertight. If you want to talk about phonemes, inevitably, all voice phonemes carry an intonation component, and the intonation component is actually reflected in the production of the vowel or consonant which is connected with it. If I say bu,
So,
it's not
so
the
we
same
know
as
that,
saying bu. It's the
right?
same phoneme, but it's not the same intonation and it's not the same sound.
So I just want to keep all of that in this corner, right? And I want to tie up to this the question, why is this? I mean, this is not new, Andrew. You knew it in the 70s or 80s, right? I
But
don't
it
know.
is new because nobody uses it. that
So
way.
that's what I'm saying. That's what I want to do. This is all this knowledge that Lala has just outlined, that you have just summarized, and Lou is chasing now and connecting the dots. The question I have: why is the dogma stronger than evidence? Why is that? Right. So just we'll just finish our present podcast today by trying to answer it, and maybe Lou will present us with some more information that we might draw on. Lou, could you continue, please? Sorry for interrupting you so much.
No, yeah, so I would love to listen. So I guess maybe we can move to the five related neuroscience-based findings I would like to share today with you. Um, the first one, I would like to say that these, what I'm going to say, like the evidence-based research in neuroscience. So I just give a summary, so for that we can discuss together. The first one is that is the uniqueness of our human brain in terms of genetic makeup and neural pathway shaped by individual life experiences. And we often say that the word human nature, right? But actually, according to Parrett, a neuroscientist, she is the author of the book How Emotion Are Made. She said that actually it's about many human natures because she emphasized that variation is the norm. Mm, Let me borrow an analogy from both says, human brain is totally different. It's just like no two hillside will be ever the same because of the exposure and also the weather condition, the rain. So the two hillside never be the same. It's just like how the human brain work. That's why we are human, unique uh, in that way. And this feature also showcase that our prior experience is unique. And David Eagleman, he says that everything new is understood through the filter of the old. So all the new learning have to pass through the filter of previous experiences. The third one is about the capacity of the brain. We know that neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to modify, reorganize itself in response to the environmental stimuli. And that's why, thanks to this capacity, we can use repetition or extensive exposure to strengthen our neural pathway to create a new skill or learn new things, even when we grow older. The next one is about the connection between the body and speech, and this is also one of the points that I utilize in my PhD research. Because we know that there is a synchronization between the human body and speech in an interpersonal and intrapersonal manner. And this phenomenon is beneficial for social interaction in many ways, and one of them is to reduce the cognitive load for the information uh, uh, to be processed in a smoother way, and also build up our affective bonds when people interact with each other. And another one is about hemispheric asymmetries. This also I already read a lot and mentioned a lot in my PhD research, and also discussed with Professor Andrew Lyon a lot. And I'm not sure if I understand correctly or not. So the right hemisphere is responsible for global attention, while the left hemisphere tend to focus on local attention. And moreover, for the new and unfamiliar input, they have to be present in the right hemisphere first before the left hemisphere jump in to deal with them. So when anything new become familiar, that will be the focus of the left hemisphere. And in regarding the language learning, there's a dominance in the left hemisphere for multi-language processes, especially for production, whereas the right hemisphere is more active in processing prosody and metaphor comprehension. So the five key neuroscience by finding here, I wonder like how we make use the finding in understanding listening comprehension as well as developing techniques so that can develop after listening comprehension. So let's bring these principle on the table for us to discuss. Yes.
All right. So you brought us back to the same question, or you want to discuss it now?
I think we can discuss together how to apply the findings in understanding and developing up to discussion. And we can go slide by slide when we talk about. I think it's better. So for the uniqueness, I think that because I was impressed by the term operational history by you know Professor Lyon, and that's why it drive me to read more about this concept. And I try to find out, why, uh, what is the underlying mechanism that the listener's meaning making mechanism should be respected. And this question drive me to read more why at the researcher or teacher we have to do that. And I think uh, because the unique we are unique learners are unique in terms of their how in terms of the way they learn, the way they operation. That's why we need to respect their how they construct the meanings. Is it what I understand correct? Is it what you
Well,
want to
you,
say
um,
anything?
so so basically, yes. So what the evidence that you have so far produced, we cannot say it's exhaustive
Mm-hmm.
for say the work that I do or Andrew does or whoever else is involved, but it does make us as teachers or researchers aware that we shouldn't be too um, self-righteous about our assumptions. So our assumption is, well, you should understand that. You should understand that, right? But what Andrew is saying, and say with that term operational histories and the uniqueness element that you've pointed to, it's saying that the student will understand what the student will understand. And you think that the student should, if you think as a teacher that the student should understand bad, then you should explain why you think that you think that. Because in terms of a student's operational histories, he or she did their best. And you think they didn't, then you tell us why, right? It's the onus is on you, not on the student, right? If you so you can only listen, and even the people who are or will be listening to our podcast, they will understand what they will understand, right? And that's why we're trying to actually hit it from many perspectives. So from Andrew, from Lala, from me. Our other Vietnamese colleague is not here because he's sitting in the dark because of the storm. Right. So we're having those different hits at the issue so that to facilitate, to trigger comprehension points in people's, in our audiences, so that they can actually take more out of this. But yeah, meaning we have our meaning making mechanisms that we've created throughout the history of our lives, and we get out of a context what we get out of the context, and that's it. You can, it doesn't have to be respected. We have to We have to appreciate the understanding that people understand what people understand.
Well,
Is
well,
this
I mean, yes, of course they understand. But what's interesting in V's list is that there is a social dimension, which is the notion of habitus. But
Mm-hmm.
what is essential, I think, because and I guess I think it because I used the term invented it, which is that of operational histories, which is that it's highly personal. It doesn't matter how social it is. At the end of the day, it's what's in your head that matters, and that will help you make meaning or make sense of the signals that you are receiving. And and I use the word signals rather than words, grammar, and all of this stuff because none of this makes any sense unless your brain says it makes sense, unless your brain gives it meaning. Your brain
so?
gives it meaning.
So the point here is that, say, people like Mary Calantris and her crowd would say, "Oh, Andrew, you're into subjectivity." No, what we are saying is you cannot remove the individual from the social because the social
Yes.
is not greater than the individual. I was talking to my mother about cooking, and my mother says her grandmother was an excellent cook. Where is that cooking? It's gone. It's gone. So whatever my mother produced is the today, right? So the individual, like my mother, has created the Polish cuisine that I identify with, but it's not the Polish cuisine which is Polish because it doesn't exist. The Polish cuisine is what contemporarily we see as being served in Polish houses, which probably would be no such, which might be a bit different than say 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and so on. So we're not saying that you cut out the social, but what we are saying is the social doesn't mean that now you eliminate the individual and you say this means that in order to speak or in order to hear boost your listening comprehension, you must do this. And then when your students fail, you go, well, you're stupid. Right?
Well,
So what I'm saying is you cannot reduce the social to a linguistic, right, to some category. So yes, and that's the drama of how the evidence from neuroscience is going to feed pedagogy because there's so much happening. And one of the reasons I would suggest um, the dogma prevails and people are lost, it's because it's complex. And it's easier to produce 20 papers on the same as your professor did because you are loved, you publish, you get accepted, your professor hugs you and all of that, and in 10 years you'll be the next professor. I have no problem with that. But and you can do that provided that you keep saying that this is the framework in which you work. But the issue of there's so much evidence, and then there's the social, and the social is irreducible to a category. So the question is, how do you marry so many points of knowledge into a technique so that it can be of use to students? And it's a hard job, or as we say in Australia, it's a hard yaka. It's really hard. It's really hard. And that's why when people assume that you can take an evidence, oh, there's Bourdieu, now we can put Bourdieu into classroom. No, you can't. And one of the critiques of Bourdieu is that he hasn't produced a framework. Well, he produced understandings, but he didn't reduce his understandings to a recipe. And consequently, everybody has a problem with Bourdieu because he didn't give us a recipe book. He didn't because he was great. He just gave you tools. Think about it. Could you use those? No? Okay, think of something else. Just tools. So it's complicated, and the translation is not straightforward. we need to now see how the social, the individual, and the different aspects of the individual and different aspects of the social, how we can actually put it together so that the student can speak English and be literate in English, right? And be happy about it. It's a drama of knowledge building.
Well, let me continue on Vy's slide, which I think is very, very useful. Yesterday there was a talk about artificial intelligence and language learning, and one of the things that the speaker was talking about was personalized learning. And so he said, well, if you have a class of 40 people, it makes life very difficult because the teacher has to work out 40 individual learning plans.
As if you could do one.
As if you could do one. The point, of course, is you cannot even do one because you are not living inside the brain of the person who's got the problem. Right? I mean, the language learner is the language learner. And the language learner, or any kind of learner, or any activity encounters a problem. You cannot read what's going on in the person's mind. And even if you could, you would filter it through the operational histories, the habitus, and everything else
Of your own, and then you would be still
of your own.
stuck with.
And so in the end, you say, oh, Anya, here is your learning plan, your personalized learning plan, which I, your teacher, the expert in language teaching, have developed for you.
10 words per week?
Well, whatever. But you see what I'm saying? I think there is this, the part of the dogma is we have these contradictions. Oh, we're going to have personalized learning environments. Okay. But the teacher will control them. Well, that's very interesting. How can the teacher control something that they cannot connect with? And that's the interesting part. And every time that we have done experiments in the last 10 years, in the doctoral program and elsewhere, every time we've done experiments, the people who were free to do what they wanted outperformed the people who did what the teacher told them in whatever form the teacher happened to tell them. Whether it was prescriptive, or whether it was a learning plan, or whether it was a story, or whether it was a pat on the back. And Wang's recent experiment is another demonstration. It's not here. Is another demonstration of this. So the dogma beats the data, because we've now got quite a lot of data that says give people freedom. What about Sugata Mitra's stuff? He's got hundreds of students who are free. What about the Sudbury Valley school system? Thousands of students. Doesn't matter. The dogma of the TESOL mentality wins, because you've got to have a class with a lesson plan and the 10 words a week that you have to learn. Which of course is amazing, because as we've discussed many times, is you will not remember the 10 words that you have to learn. No. Maybe you remember 5. And maybe you will be able to remember them or recognize them, but not use them. So I mean, there's a lot of
So in relation
yeah.
to the first slide which I showed, Ionidas, or whatever his name is, I can't remember his name. It's a Greek name. I will give him justice. Okay, so his name was. Does anyone remember?
Ioannidis.
John Ioannidis, right? So what he said was, be careful with your results, right? So I'm referring to what Andrew now said, which is, I can almost hear it. I've been around for so long now around Andrew in these discourses. I can hear it. Someone saying, "Oh, Andrew, you just have to be pragmatic," right? And Andrew would say, "Okay, be pragmatic, but also when you write your research, do say you were pragmatic and you missed this much understanding, right? So you cannot project your data or your research or your statements as truth or as evidence. What you're producing actually is just some sort of compromise, and this much was missing at this what you know, rather than just say I was pragmatic and I was truthful and these are the findings, and now this finding is going to be turned into evidence and tomorrow it will be the policy, right? So so this is that what Ionides was saying when he was saying the concepts are not clear, the designs are loose, the terminology, the range of understandings we put underneath it is questionable, right? So all of that, um, when we don't consider it, it's very easy to say, "Oh, look, I came up with this evidence. Now I will be teaching my students that. I will prepare my students for school on the basis of this evidence." It's not acting like a researcher. It's fake. A better way is to say, "We considered very little. This is what has come out from that. There's a lot to do because there's so much we don't understand." It's a much more honest way and a happier way to proceed rather than just whitewash everything.
Okay, I regrettably have to leave you soon because I've got to have a, a tooth removed. So I wonder if V has anything else that she wanted to add before I disappear.
You mean based on this slide?
Yeah,
Oh, next slide.
next
Any
slide or whatever.
Yeah. So just let me go through the next slide. So the second one I would like to emphasize because we are unique. That's why our prior experiences should be also play a significant role in understanding, listening, comprehension, and that's why when the student listen to something new, I think there should be a space for them to collide what they already know and what they are going to listen, so that there should be a collision between the two kind of knowledge, and kind of reflection and self-evaluation, so that their internal dialogue can occur. And
So
that's why learning.
that's where pedagogy is, right? That's where pedagogy is, because normally that collision doesn't happen. It can't happen because you're seeing this through your first language, and there's no collision because it's all obvious. And
Yes,
that's where that collision needs to be triggered. Not the
right.
answer given, but collision needs to be triggered.
The question is how, right? How to treat
Well,
her.
that's research, right? That's
Mm,
research. But at least you know what your job as a teacher, right? That took me some years to actually come up with the graph exactly with that sentence. That the job of the teacher is to enable that collision, to trigger it. That's not easy. What we do give them is, you must understand genre looks like this. You must understand you have to have an adverb here. You must understand that you have to write about the topic. You never write about the topic. Where did they get that from? There's no such a thing like topic. There's something like a problem. We always, like the people that I read from literature, but I'll tell you later. Andrew, would you like to produce some comments, maybe to the next slide as well, or to this one?
No, let's just go on.
Yes, and for this slide, I would like to emphasize the significance of repetition in listening and also in other learning skill. Because actually, from my observation, my colleagues, most of them think that repetition is something very boring and outdated. But I think this technique is necessary for learners to develop fluency, and also a way for them to familiarize themselves with the new language, and so that they can strengthen the neural pathway for create their new skills. And especially they should be you know go in hand with the attention, because without attention learning cannot happen, right? And based on the connection between body and speech, I think that body movement is very important for the earlier stage of listening. They should be move their body when they listen. But we I think this connection is more obvious when we talk about speaking, pronunciation, and body movement. Um, but I guess because the for listening, that is just like a synchrony within your yourself with the other people. It's happen in a hidden way, right? And also that they are related to the mirror neuron. When you look at the people talking, um, we can imitate the way they speak, and also this also facilitate our listening comprehension. So that's what I think. And finally, because when I look at the research related to the hemispheric asymmetry, uh, some research has shown that when we become late learners, we tend to our left hemisphere our left hemisphere tend to deal with the information, the input. But for the earlier bilinguals, by earlier learners, seem to be a balance between the two hemispheres. And research show that for the low pass filter input, this kind of audio can activate the right brain as a way for learner to familiarize themselves with the sound system of the new language. So I think should be the head start for the listener at the low level, because for the high proficiency listener, I mean, they are better at listening. They think that it's not necessary. From my experiment, some advanced listener think that it's the useless technique, because they don't want to listen to something nonsense. They just want to listen to the whole conversation. So that's what I think. We can.
What you're saying is just, sorry, I have to interrupt you just to make sure. What you're saying is that when students were subjected to 1 hour per day or per week of practice of
Mhm.
with exercises that Andrew designs, they felt that this practice was useless, right? Because they felt that they have to have some other form of practice, like the things they used to be used to, right? They were used to.
Yeah, I mean, the one that they are good at listening already, they want to focus on strategies for listening. But for the one that they have difficulties in listening, they found these techniques useful. They told me that they think that at first they can the when they get familiar with the prosody, and then after that they listen to the normal speech, they can
Right.
like identify the content in an easier way. Uh,
Yeah, and as they are high, and when they become highly proficient, they don't need that
yes,
anymore.
yes,
That's right.
right. So that is maybe we can consider this principle and design, some listening activities, so that we can have beginners, to practice
Or
listening.
we give people choices.
Hmm.
I mean, why not?
Right.
And that's the essence of of self-directed learning in a sense, or rhizomatic systems, or autonomous learning, or whatever it is that you want to call it.
I
Okay.
think the learner only want to do something when they think it's that useful and relevant for them.
Yes. Yes, of course.
When I force them to do, but they think it's useless, so they don't do it. Yeah.
Of course. All right, everybody. I'm afraid I have to disappear, so I will stop there. And thank you for everything. You think I'd love to hear more about what you're doing.
Yep, another
And
time.
yes, and I will disappear. Okay, so bye-bye for now. Bye.
Bye. Thank
Okay,
you, Andrew. Bye.
Bye.
thank you,
Bye.
Andrew.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lou. So we're practically finished. I just would like maybe Lala to say some of his, make some of his comments, what he thinks about all this stuff we've been discussing so far.
All right. I think based on the evidence that Lou has demonstrated, we can actually think of creating the simplest way of doing the curricula, doing the pedagogy of listening. Because at the moment, for example, in my ELT department curriculum, we have a sequential teaching listening units. The personal listening for personal communication in semester one, like listening for professional context or communication in semester two, and then listening for the what is it academic purposes in semester three. I think if we can apply the most simplest and the most simplest listening curricula that actually embraces the essentials of learning, we can actually help the learners to become better English learners. I mean, we don't want to see my students get stuck in A1 or A2 level after finishing 4 years of study. So we have to make sure that everyone can be at, let's say, B1 or B2 level, I think, when they are in the middle of their study. So we can help them to achieve a higher level of CFL level if we can. So I think the most important part of this talk will inspire me much even deeper about embracing evidence in neuroscience. Anya, thank you very much, Lou and Anya.
In a creative way, and it takes a
Yep,
while.
right,
Because I think there's evidence that, especially what Lou has actually produced two kinds of evidences that I wish we actually take home, which is the first one is about being careful. People
mm,
have their personal meaning making mechanism, operational meaning making mechanisms, and
yep,
bypassing them. I mean, you've got to know now what it means and how to work with it. And then the other, so the first aspect of it is um, believing that having one student in the classroom is going to create a fantastic learning environment. It's not true, because you still have that wall that the child or
right,
student has. So we need to be a little bit humble. And the other one is the evidence that Lou has produced now about I mean, that there is a body speech synchrony, and then the notion of filtering that wasn't really addressed in detail here. These come now from research, which is,
mm,
well, synchronization is just general knowledge that children synchronize with family and so on. But now, to use it now to correct pronunciation, to correct listening, right, because they go together, that's a pedagogic tool.
right,
And that's invented by a researcher who looks around and says, "Oh, synchronization, very interesting. How can we work with that?" And then what say you might have used in the classroom might not have actually been obvious. Someone made it obvious, said to you, "Oh,
Mhm.
well, how about if we did that?" It doesn't finish the story. That's just one technique that came out from it. Could be others. So it's very important to also remember that sometimes you are suggested a technique by, say, someone like me or Andrew or whoever, that intermediary between classroom and research is that researcher working with teachers and students. But our suggestions are not the end of the story. It's extremely important to remember. And plus, there's more evidence coming, and there are different ways of connecting the dots. So there's a lot that can be
Yes.
done in that space. I honestly think that I'm always against the idea that teachers should be doing research in classroom. I think it's such a bad. It just misunderstands the concept of research and misunderstands the job of the teacher. I think we need teachers working with researchers,
Mm,
Mhm.
preferably on an ongoing basis,
right.
or as often as possible. I think we need that collaboration because someone like me, most of my job is to think.
Mm,
I mean, the older I get, the more research I do, the more people invest in me and just pay me for thinking. Right? So I'm not in the classroom for 77 hours a week, whereby I remember Amy Norman, one of
yeah.
our master students. I'm talking to her during the class, like master class. Talking to her, and she says, Anya, I don't hear you. For the last 8 hours, I had little children talking into my head. I'm hearing nothing. Like, how
Mm,
can a person overwhelmed by her work
Yes.
now just be expected to do introspective, critical research that is, supporting her? This is just a nonsense jargon. It's just like a
mm,
narrative, but maybe it's fine if
right.
you are a professor sitting in some policy office and it just comes out from your pen as easy as you're breathing. But it's not practical.
Mhm.
So, so yeah, collaborate. So thank you, Lo, and thank you, Lala. That's been
Thank you.
very, very interesting. I think it's good to point all of these elements and wonder now where to from here. And definitely, this provided a context for more of the podcast that will ensue from here on. So thank you very much. Thank you, audiences.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Goodbye.